Greetings, fellow HFY fans. Thank you for coming. I'm glad you could be here. Before we begin, if you enjoyed this content, please consider hitting that like button, leaving a comment afterward, and subscribing if you haven't already. Also, please be on the lookout in the coming days for our new Patreon. It should be coming up soon. Now, on with the story. A Princess of Mars by Edgar Rice Burroughs. Episode 10, Chapters 18 and 19. Chapter 18, Chained in Warhoon. It must have been several hours before I regained consciousness, and I well remember the feeling of surprise which swept over me as I realized that I was not dead. I was lying among a pile of sleeping silks and furs in the corner of a small room in which were several green warriors, and bending over me was an ancient and ugly female. As I opened my eyes, she turned to one of the warriors, saying,
"He will live, O Jed. 'Tis well,"
replied the one so addressed, rising and approaching my couch.
"He should render rare sport for the great games."
And now, as my eyes fell upon him, I saw that he was no Thark, for his ornaments and metal were not of that horde. He was a huge fellow, terribly scarred about the face and chest, and with one broken tusk and a missing ear. Strapped on either breast were human skulls, and depending from these a number of dried human hands. His reference to the great games of which I had heard so much while amongst the Tharks convinced me that I had but jumped from one purgatory into Gehenna. After a few more words with the female, during which she assured him that I was now fully fit to travel, the Jed ordered that we mount and ride after the main column. I was strapped securely to as wild and unmanageable a thoat as I had ever seen, and with a mounted warrior on either side to prevent the beast from bolting, we rode forth at a furious pace in pursuit of the column. My wounds gave me but little pain, so wonderfully and rapidly had the applications and injections of the female exercised their therapeutic powers, and so deftly as she bound and plastered the injuries. Just before dark we reached the main body of troops shortly after they had made camp for the night. I was immediately taken before the leader, who proved to be the Jeddak of the hordes of Warhoon. Like the Jed who had brought me, he was frighteningly scarred, and also decorated with the breastplate of human skulls and dried dead hands, which seemed to mark all the greater warriors amongst the Warhoons, as well to indicate their awful ferocity, which greatly transcends even that of the Tharks. The Jeddak, Bar Komas, who was comparatively young, was the object of the fierce and jealous hatred of his old lieutenant Darkova, the Jed who had captured me, and I could not but note the almost studied efforts with which the latter made to affront his superior. He entirely omitted the usual formal salutation as we entered the presence of the Jeddak, and as he pushed me roughly before the ruler, he exclaimed in a loud and menacing voice,
"I have brought a strange creature wearing the metal of a Thark, whom it is my pleasure to have battle with a wild thoat at the great games. He will die as Bar Komas, your Jeddak, sees fit, if at all,"
replied the young ruler, with emphasis and dignity.
"If at all?"
roared Darkova.
"By the dead hands at my throat, but he shall die, Bar Komas. No maudlin weakness on your part shall save him. Oh, would that Warhoon were ruled by a real Jeddak, rather than by a water-hearted weakling, from whom even old Darkova could tear the metal with his bare hands."
Bar Komas eyed the defiant and insubordinate chieftain for an instant, his expression one of haughty, fearless contempt and hate. Then, without drawing a weapon, and without uttering a word, he hurled himself at the throat of his defamer. I never before had seen two great Martian warriors battle with nature's weapons, and the exhibition of animal ferocity which ensued was as fearful a thing as the most discordant imagination could picture. They tore at each other's eyes and ears, and with their hands and with their gleaming tusks repeatedly slashed and gored until both were cut fairly to ribbons from head to foot. Bar Komas had much the better of the battle as he was stronger, quicker, and more intelligent. It soon seemed that the encounter was done, saving only the final death thrust when Bar Komas slipped in breaking away from a clinch. It was the one little opening that Darkova needed, and hurling himself at the body of his adversary, he buried his single mighty tusk in Bar Komas's groin with a last powerful effort, ripped the young Jeddak wide open from the full length of his body, the great tusk finally wedging in the bones of Bar Komas's jaw. Victor and vanquished rolled limp and lifeless upon the moss, a huge mass of torn and bloody flesh. Barcomas was stone dead, and only the most Herculean efforts on the part of Dejah's females saved him from the fate he deserved. 3 days later he walked without assistance to the body of Barcomas, which, by custom, had not been moved from where it fell, and placing his foot upon the neck of his erstwhile ruler, he assumed the title of Jeddak of Wahun. The dead Jeddak's hands and head were removed to be added to the ornaments of his conqueror, and then his women cremated what remained, amid wild and terrible laughters. The injuries to Dejah had delayed the march so greatly that it was decided to give up the expedition, which was a raid upon a small Thark community in retaliation for the destruction of the incubator, until after the Great Games, and the entire body of warriors, 10,000 in number, turned back towards Wahun. My introduction to these cruel and bloodthirsty people was but an index to the scenes I witnessed almost daily while with them. They are a smaller horde than the Tharks, but much more ferocious. Not a day passed but that some number of the various Wahun communities met in deadly combat. I have seen as high as 8 mortal duels within a single day. We reached the city of Wahun after some 3 days of march, and I was immediately cast into a dungeon and heavily chained to the floor and walls. Food was brought me at intervals, but owing to the utter darkness of the place, I do not know whether I lay there days, or weeks, or months. It was the most horrible experience of all my life, and that my mind did not give way to the terrors of that inky blackness has been a wonder to me ever since. The place was filled with creeping, crawling things. Cold, sinuous bodies passed over me when I lay down, and in the darkness I occasionally caught glimpses of gleaming, fiery eyes fixed in horrible intentness upon me. No sound reached me from the world above, and no word would my jailer vouchsafe when my food was brought to me, although I at first bombarded him with questions. Finally, all the hatred and maniacal loathing for these awful creatures who had placed me in this horrible place was centered by my tottering reason upon this single emissary who represented to me the entire horde of Wahuns. I had noticed that he always advanced with his dim torch to where he could place the food within my reach, and as he stooped to place it upon the floor, his head was about on level with my breast. So, with the great cunning of a madman, I backed into the far corner of my cell when I next heard him approaching, and gathered a little slack of the great chain which held me in my hand. I waited his coming, crouching like some beast of prey. As he stooped to place my food upon the ground, I swung the chain above my head and crashed the links with all my strength upon his skull. Without a sound, he slipped to the floor, stone dead. Laughing and chattering like the idiot I was fast becoming, I fell upon his prostrate form, my fingers feeling for his dead throat. Presently, they came in contact with a small chain at the end of which dangled a number of keys. The touch of my fingers on these keys brought back my reason with the suddenness of thought. No longer was I a gibbering idiot, but a sane, reasoning man with the means of escape within my very hands. As I was groping to remove the chain from about my victim's neck, I glanced up into the darkness to see 6 pairs of gleaming eyes fixed, unwinking upon me. Slowly they approached, and slowly I shrank back from the awful horror of them. Back into my corner I crouched, holding my hands palm out before me, and stealthily on came the awful eyes until they reached the dead body at my feet. Then slowly they retreated, but this time with a strange grating sound, and finally they disappeared in some black and distant recess of my dungeon. Chapter 19. Battling in the Arena. Slowly I regained my composure and finally essayed again to attempt to remove the keys from the dead body of my former jailer, but as I reached out into the darkness to locate it, I found to my horror that it was gone. Then the truth flashed on me. The owners of those gleaming eyes had dragged my prize away from me to be devoured in their neighboring lair, as they had been waiting for days, for weeks, for months, through all this awful eternity of my imprisonment, to drag my dead carcass to their feast. For 2 days no food was brought me, but then a new messenger appeared, and my incarceration went on as before, but not again did I allow my reason to be submerged by the horror of my position. Shortly after this episode, another prisoner was brought in and chained near me. By the dim torchlight I saw that he was a red Martian, and I could scarcely await the departure of his guards to address him. As their retreating footsteps died away in the distance, I called out softly the Martian word of greeting, Keo. "Who are you who speaks out of the darkness?" he answered. "John Carter, a friend of the Red Men of Helium." "I am of Helium," he said, "but I do not recall your name." And then I told him of my story as I have written it here, omitting only any reference to my love for Dejah Thoris. He was much excited by the news of Helium's princess and seemed quite positive that she and Sola could easily have reached a point of safety from where they had left me. He said that he knew the place well because the defile through which the Walhoon warriors had passed when they discovered us was the only one ever used by them when marching to the south. "Dejah Thoris and Sola entered the hills not 5 miles from a great waterway and are now probably quite safe," he assured me. My fellow prisoner was Kantos Khan, a Padwar lieutenant in the Navy of Helium. He had been a member of the ill-fated expedition which had fallen into the hands of the Tharks at the time of Dejah Thoris' capture, and he briefly related the events which followed the defeat of the battleships. Badly injured and only partially manned, they had limped slowly toward Helium, but while passing near the city of Zodanga, the capital of Helium's hereditary enemies amongst the Red Men of Barsoom, they had been attacked by a great body of war vessels, and all of the craft to which Kantos Khan belonged were either destroyed or captured. His vessel was chased for days by 3 of the Zodangan warships, but finally escaped during the darkness of a moonless night. 30 days after the capture of Dejah Thoris, or about the time of our coming to Thark, his vessel had reached Helium, with about 10 survivors of the original crew of 700 officers and men. Immediately 7 great fleets, each of 100 mighty warships, had been dispatched to search for Dejah Thoris, and from these vessels 2,000 smaller craft had been kept out continuously in futile search for the missing princess. 2 green Martian communities had been wiped off the face of Barsoom by the avenging fleets, but no trace of Dejah Thoris had been found. They had been searching amongst the northern hordes, but only within the past few days they had extended their quest to the south. Kantos Khan had been detailed to one of those small one-man flies, and had the misfortune to be discovered by the Walhoons while exploring their city. The bravery and daring of the man had won my greatest respect and admiration. Alone, he had landed at the city's boundary and on foot had penetrated to the buildings surrounding the plaza. For 2 days and nights he had explored their quarters and dungeons in search of his beloved princess, only to fall into the hands of a party of Walhoons as he was about to leave, after assuring himself that Dejah Thoris was not a captive there. During the period of our incarceration, Kantos Khan and I became well acquainted, and formed a warm personal friendship. A few days only elapsed, however, before we were dragged forth from our dungeon for the great games. We were conducted early one morning to an enormous amphitheater, which, instead of having been built upon the surface of the ground, was excavated below the surface. It had partially filled with debris, so that how large it had originally been was difficult to say. In its present condition, it held the entire 20,000 Walhoons of the assembled hordes. The arena was immense, but extremely uneven and unkempt. Around it the Walhoons had piled building stones from some of the ruined edifices of the ancient city to prevent the animals and captives from escaping into the audience, and at each end had been constructed cages to hold them until their turns came to meet some horrible death upon the arena. Kantos Khan and I were confined together in one of those cages. In the others were wild Calots, Thoats, mad Zittigars, green warriors, and women of other hordes, and many strange and ferocious wild beasts of Barsoom which I had never before seen. The din of their roaring, growling, and squealing was deafening, and the formidable appearance of any one of them was enough to make the stoutest heart feel grave forebodings. Kantos Khan explained to me that at the end of the day one of these prisoners would gain freedom, and the others would lie dead about the arena. The winners in the various contests of the day would be pitted against each other until only 2 remained alive, the victor in the last encounter being set free, whether animal or man. The following morning the cages would be filled with a new consignment of victims, and so on through the 10 days of the games. Shortly after we had been caged, the amphitheater began to fill, and within an hour every available part of the seating space was occupied. Doc Kova, with his Jeds and chieftains, sat in the center of one side of the arena upon a large raised platform. At a signal from Doc Kova, the doors of 2 cages were thrown open, and a dozen green Martian females were driven to the center of the arena. Each was given a dagger, and then, at the far end, a pack of 12 calots or wild dogs were loosed upon them. As the brutes, growling and foaming, rushed upon the almost defenseless women, I turned my head that I might not see the horrible sight. The yells and laughters of the green horde bore witness to the excellent quality of the sport, and when I turned back to the arena, as Kantos Khan told me it was over, I saw 3 victorious calots snarling and growling over the bodies of their prey. The women had given a good account of themselves. Next, a mad zitazar was loosed among the remaining dogs, and so it went throughout the long, hot, horrible day. During the day I was pitted against first men and then beasts, but as I was armed with a longsword and always outclassed my adversary in agility and generally in strength as well, it proved but child's play to me. Time and time again I won the applause of the bloodthirsty multitude, and towards the end there were the cries that I be taken from the arena and be made a member of the hordes of Wahoon. Finally there were but 3 of us left, a great green warrior of some far northern horde, Kantos Khan, and myself. The other 2 were to do battle, and then I would fight the conqueror for the liberty which was accorded the final winner. Kantos Khan had fought several times during the day, and like myself had always proven victorious, but occasionally by the smallest margins. Especially when pitted against the green warriors, I had little hope that he could best this giant adversary who had mowed down all before him during the day. The fellow towered nearly 16 feet in height, while Kantos Khan was some inches under 6 feet. As they advanced to meet one another, I saw for the first time a trick of Martian swordsmanship which centered Kantos Khan's every hope of victory in life on one cast of the dice. For, as he came within about 20 feet of the huge fellow, he threw his sword arm behind him over his shoulder, and with a mighty sweep hurled his weapon point foremost at the green warrior. It flew true as an arrow, and piercing the poor devil's heart, laid him dead upon the arena. Kantos Khan and I were now pitted against each other, but as we approached the encounter, I whispered to him to prolong the battle until nearly dark in the hope that we might find some means of escape. The horde evidently guessed that we had no hearts to fight each other, and so they howled in rage as neither of us placed a fatal thrust. Just as I saw the sudden coming of dark, I whispered to Kantos Khan to thrust his sword between my left arm and my body. And as he did so, I staggered back, clasping the sword tightly with my arm, and thus fell to the ground with his weapon apparently protruding from my chest. Kantos Khan perceived my coup, and, stepping quickly to the side, he placed his foot upon my neck, and withdrawing his sword from my body, gave me the final death blow through the neck, which is supposed to sever the jugular vein. But in this instance the cold blade slipped harmlessly into the sand of the arena. In the darkness which had now fallen, none could but tell that he had really finished me. I whispered to him to go and claim his freedom, and then look for me in the hills east of the city, and so he left me. When the amphitheater had cleared, I crept stealthily to the top, as the great excavation lay far from the plaza and in the untended portion of the great city. I had little trouble reaching the hills beyond. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. I am the Casual Death Worlder, your host, and this has been A Princess of Mars, chapters 18 and 19. I hope you enjoyed listening to it as much as I enjoyed bringing it to you. If you did, please consider dropping a like, maybe a subscription, and dropping a comment in the comments down below. Now, as always, a huge shout out to my editor, Gregor. Thank you very much, buddy. I could not do this without you. Okay, my apologies for the long delay between the last episode and now. I just got back from vacation, the first vacation I've actually taken in about 25 years. And, well, it was about as much nightmare and disaster as it was relaxing. I pretty much need a vacation to recover from my vacation. We almost got stranded a couple of 1,000 miles from home. Yeah, that was fun. Okay, as I said at the beginning, we are starting a Patreon that should hopefully be up within the next few days. I'm still trying to figure certain things out. Heck, I'm still trying to figure out how to operate it and upload stuff. Oy. In the meantime, let's see. Okay. Who will watch that Starship booster catch that happened right about the beginning of my vacation? What'd y'all think? You excited for the next one? That should be right about a week from the recording of this. So let me know. Leave your answers in the comments down below. In the meantime, be well, be safe. I love you all. Bye-bye.